Kui is a musical heritage, a story with a deep meaning. The Kui Almazhay, the Kui Shi is Baijagit, legends in music. The Akun Baishi was returning home after a long journey. He gently patted his horse and peered into the distance, where it seemed to him that he saw a thin, bluish trickle of smoke rising from the hearth of the yurts. But the vision, unfortunately, as quickly as it appeared, disappeared. Unfortunately, the village was still far away. It is so nice that I have a strong and sturdy horse, Baishi thought. If he didn't have a horse like this, it would have taken him many days. He called the horse Joly, which means the flame, and he was right. The temperament of the stallion was not calm. For a long time they couldn't see eye to eye, but well, there was no better horse for him. Joly became his devoted friend. The Akin began to think about how wonderful and amazing it was that God had created horses. It is difficult to imagine how one could live without a horse. From these thoughts, Baishi was light-hearted, so he took out his dumbra and began to play a merry tune. The Akin moved on a little more and decided to let his stallion have a rest. He stopped the horse and jumped down from him. He began to think, the wealth of a man is always his fast and brave horse. And there is not a single Jigit on the earth who does not dream about his tulpar, the winged horse that rises in the air with its wings and throws lightning and gets ahead of the wind. The Batir's wings are his horse, so everyone says in the village, so it is. The Akin continued to think, holding out a treat hidden in his blossom. Baishi put his hand along the cool, smooth horse's side, and he touched the silken mane and admired it. The memory, like a gusty wind, swirled around his head. He remembered his childhood, full of carefree joys and dreams. He remembered his first horse. There was no greater happiness for him than to jump on the stallion and rush through the steppe, cutting the silver feathered grass. When you can fly with him freely and by leaps and bounds like a bird, you can also go slowly and proudly, just going next to your beautiful horse. Jalin pulled its mane back, and the sweet memories of Balshi instantly evaporated. He again mounted his horse and slowly made his way, playing on his dumbra akui about the famous Batir and his glorious horse. The Kui Almazhay. "Son, son," the soft voice said. The boy turned his head and saw his mother, who looked at him with such warmth and love. But for some reason, her big, shiny eyes looked sad. "I've brought you a real kamshi," she said, and handed it to her son. "My son, this is the rider's weapon, and it is soaked with the horse's sweat. Any evil spirit is afraid to approach this scourge. Only the kamshi must be used in a very reasonable way, so that you wouldn't hurt your horse without reason." The child, not blinking, looked into his mother's eyes and listened attentively to her every word. "You will turn 3 years old tomorrow, and your father will set you on a horseback. You will become a real man. But this," the mother continued, "this your little saddle. For now, instead of stirrups, you will have straps made of felt cloth, which I have lined with beautiful linens. Tomorrow will be a holiday, and the whole village will look at you, Abul Mansur." The boy laughed and jumped up from his down quilt and hugged his mother tightly, keenly aware that her clothes were soaked with the sweet smell of mare's milk. "Your hat and clothes will be decorated with the feathers of an owl, and your horse will be beautifully set up." The mother embraced him and firmly pressed her son to her chest. Suddenly, Abulai shuddered and opened his eyes. For a moment he didn't understand why he was in the yurt alone and where his mother was. But the dream quickly vanished. He listened. It was a deep night and very quiet and calm. A shiver ran down through his strong body. He shivered and put on his robe, trimmed with fur. He looked forward. The coals smoldered in the hearth. They threw black, fanciful shadows on the walls of the yurt that were hung with felt carpets. He looked at the dancing shadows and saw the ferocious warriors rushing with their horses. But the picture faded away, and it was no longer Batirs, but they were terrible monsters. He heard the muffled horse trampings and the herdsmen putting horses out onto the grass. So it is dawn, Abulai thought, and he closed his eyes. He wanted to fall into his sweet dream again, but he couldn't fall asleep. His mind was racing, and thoughts appeared one after the other, mixed up and disappearing again. He rarely dreamed of his mother, but for some reason she always came to him in a dream before some disturbing event. And he knew what kind of event would await him. Soon, in fact very soon, when all preparations were completed, he would lead his army in a campaign. And he felt incredible strength and courage. His blood was hot, and his movements quick. No wonder he became a commander of Abul Mambet Khan. And he would soon be able to knock out one of those Jungar dogs who endlessly attacked the peaceful Auls and shed the blood of his people. He was beside himself with rage. Abulai stood up and put on his warm robe and left the field tent. He saw a still sleepy, quiet camp, but soon when the sun rose, the noise of the drum would be heard. It began to dawn, and the purple-red bonfires began to slowly turn pale, slightly throwing back shadows on the lookouts. Abelai breathed in the cold morning air, and he turned to its herdsmen. "Ah, Abelai Sultan, let the rising sun and the Almighty give you good luck on this campaign," said the groom Achmet. Even he was short, but heavy built. "And you, Achmet, let the Almighty protect you." Achmet bowed and said, "I have prepared all of the horses. They had a good rest and have gained strength." "And how are the young stallions? Will they become good military horses?" Abelai asked, peering into the good-natured face of his servant. "I am doing my best. I teach them not to be afraid of anything, and they can hear the clanking of weapons and the whistling of arrows and the thunder of the battle, and also fire. It takes time. These stallions are very obstinate." Abelai nodded his head and said, "Show me my handsome." "Ah," Achmet smiled, answering, of course, your Almazhay is one of the best horses. He is easygoing and tough, and he is besides that extremely harsh and strong." They passed through the whole camp and went out to the herd grazing in the steppe. What kind of breed were they? The low, sturdy, short-legged horses and the tall, slender crossbreeds of Arabian horses with steppe horses, gray, bay, red, and black. Achmet dissolved into the herd like butter in hot milk. Before Abelai blinked, again he saw his herdsman, who led him to a beautiful horse. He looked at his favorite one, the thoroughbred horse of a rare color. The silver bay stallion walked, moving his ears and scattering his curved neck and his silken mane. The correct lines of a dry but dense, elongated crop with a clearly marked tail emphasized all of his graces. Abelai clicked his tongue with joy and said loudly, "Ah, what a horse! Graceful and without a single piece of fat, my Almazhay." Abelai mounted his horse and fled into the steppe. With a swift run, he heated himself and his stallion. The steppe was pleasant and calm in the morning, and it was hard to even imagine that soon blood would be spilt here, and the earth would not be sown by plant seeds, but instead by dead soldiers. Early in the morning, a dirty white blanket wrapped the valley. The damp, vicious mist covered the hills. The war troops of Abelai made their campaign. The warriors stood on a hillock, and hundreds of their sharp eyes tried to see something behind the whitewashed veil. At the bottom of the valley, behind the stony hill, the large Jungarian troops were hidden. And it seemed that there was no way around, only the silent, sleeping plain fog and dampness. By noontime, a strong wind rose and tore off the white mist blanket from the steppe. The opponents stood opposite each other, and they knew that in a moment they would start the bloody battle. On both sides, the archers were seen first, and they pulled their bowstrings. Abelai was well aware of the tactics of the Jungar battle. He knew how the enemy would creep along in the distance of the arrow's flight, how they would enter the battle, not in the ranks, but would close in semicircles, and try to round his army to bring down his batirs in a bloody shower of thousands of arrows. Abelai put his commanders in line. The strongest and fearless warriors stood up in front of the whole troop. The black, fearless eyes of Abelai were shining. He raised his sword above his head. "Abilai!" he shouted. "Abilai!" The Batirs all shouted and whipped their horses. The troop ran to meet the enemy's spears, swords, and arrows. When the ranks were close to each other, the Jungars began to go into the back area, trying to surround the detachment. But Abilai turned to them and made his Almazhay horse, flying towards them with all strength. He hacked the enemy with a saber from right to left. And even the desperate Jungarian fighters who had seen many battles began to step back from such pressure. He pushed aside the enemies who had come forward and pressed them to the center. Suddenly, the huge warrior with a large spear flew to Abilai. A moment later, a steep, sharp spike would have pierced his chest, but instead, suddenly Almazhay lifted his front legs and stood on his hind legs. The spear pierced deeply into the horse's ribs, and they heard a crunching sound. But Almazhay did not fall. Instead, he ran off with his owner forward and carrying him out of the bloody battle. The brave Batirs were fighting desperately. Sabers flashed and arrows whistled shrilly, piercing ruthless bodies of people. Dozens of them fell dead on the wet land. The Jungars jerked and ran. The Batirs had completely defeated their enemies. The valiant warriors lit up bonfires, and they exuberated over their victory. But this victory was a bitter one for Abilai. He had lost his friend in the battle horse, Almazhay. He was sitting by the fire, bowing his head, when one Batir came up to him with a dombra, and bending over said, "Do not worry, Abilai Sultan, about the loss of your horse. He has saved your life, our commander." Abilai lifted up his tired eyes at him and replied, "I have lost a loyal friend, one that you can meet only once in your life. I will compose a song about him, and he will remain forever in our memory. So he will live on forever." "Compose, glorious Batir, and ease my pain," Abilai said, the future Khan of the entire Kazakh Khanate. Kuis created by Bayezid are in lots of varieties and are still successfully performed by many dombrists. In the kuis of great musicians, one can hear the clang of weapons and the whistling of arrows, the screams of Batirs and the trampling of horses. In his works, the motif of the boundless steppe and the unbending will of the people for freedom can always be heard.